All right, welcome to review session on VB. Sure got my microphone on. Welcome to the review session for VBA. For is201. Let's turn that mic down a bit. Okay, that should be okay. I bet that's recording just fine. So the file you'll want to download is available here. Let me zoom in so you can see that a little bit better. So go to vba-course.blogspot.com. This is actually a blog that I maintain for the VBA course that I teach. I teach a whole semester long course just in VBA. And it was just a handy place to put the file to download for today's class. And that should be on the first page of that blog. So it's just a page called data.xlsx. When you get that downloaded and opened, you'll want to probably save it immediately as an XLSM file so that you don't accidentally lose any macros, because of course an XLSX file cannot have any macros in it. So my plan today to review is just like reviewing some stuff with loops, processing data, doing a nested loop, doing some batch processing. And then once I've gone through those examples, just any questions you might have, we'll be glad to take those and dive a little deeper. Feel free, those of you who are here in class today, to stop and ask questions as we go along. So you have the priority for being here. Other folks who are watching just happen to get whatever questions you ask. So, but if you have a question about something, chances are it'll be something that someone else has a question about too. So don't be shy. Not sure which file I already opened, except close. I didn't open any. Okay, so I'm going to open up data.xlsx, and I'm going to save it as data.xlsm. Editing, save as .xlsm. Okay, so the first example that I want to do is to go through. So we've got this first sheet called customers, and it just has it's like a record of customers. We've got first name, last name, city, state, and zip, email, and phone number. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to write some VBA that goes through this set of data and makes address labels. So instead of having this go across, I'd like to kind of put over here in column K, I'd like to put first and last name on one row, and then the street address on the next row, and then city, state, and zip on the next row. In fact, kind of like what we have here on the labels sheet. So I'm trying to generate this. So here's Bridget Slucock from New York City, and 55 Gina Place. And so right now that information is here just on one row, and I'd like to get it put onto format to be like a mailing address. All right, so those of you who are here, you have the file open, you're ready to go. All right, so I'm just going to open up I don't even have my Visual Basic editor. My tab isn't showing here because I'm just new to this office. So let me go to options and bring up my developer tab, customize the ribbon, and developer. All right, so on my developer tab, I'm just going to open up the Visual Basic editor. And because this was an XLS file, not an XLSM file, there is no module here to work in. And so I'm going to choose Insert Module. That will give me the module that I want. And while you guys are getting that open, I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger. So in my editor format, make that like, I don't know, 18-point font. And I can find a little bit easier to read. Okay. There we go. It looks pretty good. Can you see that okay? Meg, can you see that one all right? Great. So why don't we just call this subprocedure make labels? So I don't know if you're using the term subprocedure or using the term macro in class. Macros and subprocedures are almost exactly the same. Macros just, anyway, I think for our purposes, we can call them the same thing. So I'll probably use the term subprocedure. If you're used to macro, just think macro if you hear me say subprocedure. The whole idea, it's a block of VBA code that I can make run together. So I say run these lines, and whatever lines we have laid out there, we're ready to go. So we've got some folks joining us here. So let me just bring up a notepad that shows where the URL to where this file is to be able to download. I'll let that hang out on the screen. So you want to browse to this URL, and there's a file called text,
Okay.
or called data.xlsx.
Okay.
We can get it downloaded and then open it up. Then you'll be able to catch up without too much trouble.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so the task here then is to read through all of the data that's here. I think there's only like 100 customers here, but we want to read through and pull in first name, last name, and then organize the city, state, and zip so that we can have something approximating mailing labels. Let's just adjust this a little bit. So I'm going to start just by making a loop to be able to loop across that data, and I'm going to kind of prove that I'm in control of the data by making a loop that will loop through and show off every customer's first name. So that'll be my step. One of the things that, especially beginning programmers, problem that they'll have, kind of a mistake they make is they'll try to solve the whole problem at once. And then when it doesn't work, it's like, I'm not quite sure where the problem is because I've done so much. And so a better approach to doing any kind of programming task is to say, let me start with something that is going to be like a building block to getting where I want to go, make sure it works, and then work step by step, a little bit at a time to be able to get to where I'm headed. You got the file okay?
Yep.
Okay, and did you insert a module?
Yes.
All right, so you guys are already familiar with how to do that. Wonderful. Okay. So I'm going to need a variable to kind of work through the looping that I'm doing to keep track of the different rows that I'm on. So I'm just going to declare a variable dim. I'm going to call it row. I'll make that as an integer variable. And so I've only got 100 customers here. Integers can basically go from plus or minus 32,000 is the limit. So it's possible if I had a bigger data set that I'd have to use a different data type to be able to get to all of them, but I don't have more than 32,000 rows, so integer will be just fine. Now, the simplest loop that you have in VBA is the do loop. So you start with the keyword do, you end with the keyword loop, and all that says is, hey, here's the beginning of the loop. When you get to loop, go back to the beginning of the loop. That's the end, go back to the beginning. This is called an endless loop, and we want to be very careful about that. Don't run this yet. You'll kill Excel. It'll really take over Excel, that one loop. So anytime I write a do loop, maybe you might even think anytime I write any loop, you might want to do this. I'm going to put the keyword in here, do events. What do events does, it just says, listen, every time you get to that do events statement, it tells the Visual Basic interpreter, the thing that's actually running the code, to say, hey, just check here for a moment, see if someone's trying to get my attention. And so that will let me stop the code. So it's really easy to put yourself into an endless loop, a loop that there's no way out of, and the do events will give you a way to get out of that. So do this. I'm going to set up row. I'm going to initialize that to like number 2. So the first row that has data I'm going to want to process on here is number 2. And so the idea behind a do loop is that it's going to check the condition. Is it time to get out? Like every time it runs, it's going to run the loop once. It's going to check, hey, should I get out of the loop? It'll run the loop. It'll run it again. Hey, should I get out of the loop? It'll ask every time. And so that's what we're going to do here. And so I'm going to tell it how to get out of the loop right here, right after the word do. So I'm going to do until, UNTIL. And then I'm going to give it something to look at that's going to evaluate to true or false. And I'm just going to say cells, row number, row, column number, and you can either put the column number, I can put the column letter here in quotes. I'm going to just put the letter here because I think it's a little easier to see if I've got the one of them's a letter and one's a number. Until whatever cell on this worksheet, whatever cell is on row number, that's the 2 for now, column number A, so A2, until that dot value, the value of that cell is equal to an empty string. So an empty string is just quote, like a double quote, no space involved. And that's what an empty cell evaluates to. So I'm saying I want to check, I'm going to say, hey, do this loop. But here it says, hey, before you even start, is this true? And so this is like a statement. It says cell number A2 is equal to, its value is equal to a 0-length string. Is that true or false?
Is this the same as is empty?
Oh, do you guys know is empty? Did you learn is empty in class? It is exactly the same as is empty, but let's use is empty. That's what you're familiar with. So you're already familiar with is empty. We're just going to go until it's empty.
Well, no, there's another way to do that.
Yeah. So yeah, empty is the same as a 0-length string. There may be other things that I should say that a 0-length string, a collection of characters with no characters in it, is what that is. Is it qualifies as empty. There may be other things that qualify as empty, but an empty string qualifies as empty. Okay, so you're familiar with that. So the first time through, this is going to be 2. It's going to say is empty. This will return true or false. In this case, we'll return false. And so we'll come into the loop. Now, we better give ourselves some way to advance in this loop. And so I'm going to increment row, and I'll probably do it just before the do events. I'll say row is equal to what it used to be plus 2. No, I don't want to skip that. That would skip lines. I just want to do plus 1. This is confusing to some students to see, like almost this looks like a statement of equality, which can't possibly be true. Something is equal to something plus 1. And the only time that's true is if that something happens to be infinity. So this is a little strange, but one of the things that you can actually do here that you don't have to do, but it's part of the syntax that kind of makes this more into like a readable sentence. Like anytime you have an assignment statement where you're saying something is going to take on a new value, you can put the keyword let in here. And that turns into like an English language sentence that tells you what it's doing. Let row equal its current value plus 1. It's almost like the voice of God. Let row equal 5 or something. And so this let is like totally optional. But I found that for beginning students, it's kind of nice to see that because then you see, oh, this is not an equation. This is an assignment. We're taking what's in the right-hand side, putting it in what's in the left-hand side. Okay, so now what I'm trying to do here is just, I think I've got the structure here in place. So now row is going to start at 2. It's going to check is A2 empty. No, this is going to be false. And so we come into the loop, we'll do whatever we have here. We're going to change the value of the row. We'll come up here. Now row will be 3 the next time through. It is 3 empty, no. It'll say 4 empty, no. 5 empty, no. It'll just keep going until it won't find these empty at the end. Now, I'm going to do here a debug.print. And for me, I always want to start, like, I've got a problem. Before I start putting the data where I think it's going to go, I just want to print it off, because if I print it off, then I can see that I've got the right data. And then I'm a little more kind of ready to write it to the sheet where I'm going to write it. So I need to view my immediate window. So view immediate window. And I'll bring this up to the top where it's easier for you guys to see here. And so I'm just going to say debug.print. I'm going to print row, so I can see it'll print 2 the first time, 3 the second time, and so forth. Row, and then I'm going to print whatever is in cell number 2. Just copy this and change that to column B. So I should see 2 and then Bridget, 3 Talbert, 4 Susan. And that should run through all of those. Anytime I've got a loop, it's a really good idea to save before I run it. I thought I saved this as a VBA, so let me cancel that. Let's save this as an XLSM. Data.xlsm. Okay, so now I've saved it. I'll hit the play button to run. And yeah, it looks like it prints off those 100 customers, 2 to 101. I've got it. So that's the loop that's kind of put me in control of that data. Questions? The lighting in here okay? Should I dim the lights so it's easier, the screen's easier to see? Are you okay?
Yes, please dim.
None of it. Yeah, I'm not that familiar with light switches in this room, so who knows what we'll see. Oh, got the first one. Okay, so now I think what I'd like to do is declare 3 variables up here just to correspond to the 3 elements of data I'm going to try to put on these labels. So let me dim, I'm going to dim one as full name.
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
So I'm trying to run the program, the sub, and on my debug.print space rows.cells, it says that row is an invalid qualifier.
So let's make sure that you have row declared as variable.
I do, and I have it equal to row equals 2. And I looked up and it doesn't
Oh,
look like,
because you have a period afterwards, you want a comma.
oh,
So yeah, the problem there, in case some of you on the video are having the same problem. If you have a period here instead of a comma, it's gonna think, oh, this is some object here. If there's some object that has a cells method and it's going, I don't know what object, it says it's gotta be an object. Can't be the variable because you can't say variable dot something. So it's not that variable, it's gotta be something else. And it was saying, yeah, I don't know what you're talking about.
and we used a comma because we're printing both row and whatever was in that
That's
cell.
right. There's a comma here on the print line says print this and then print that. It'll kind of put a tab between it.
Okay,
So it kind of helps to line data up. Which would be kind of nice. So yeah, if we look right here down to where this, oh, still put, I thought that would be kind of lined up because it's a tab character. I don't know. Anyway, yeah, let's just put a printable. Okay, so now I'm declaring full name as a string. I'm going to go ahead and declare 3 string variables. And so that'll be full name. I'll do address. Oops. And then I'll do one, it's not a very good variable name, I think, but I'll call it city, state, zip. All right, and so maybe before I've got my debug.print in here, let me just go ahead and get my first and last name put together into that one variable. So this is going to be doing what's called string concatenation. So I'm going to look at these 2 values and I'm going to squish them together. So the point is I don't want them like to go into different cells. I'm going to want them to go into one cell. So I'm just going to join them here together in this variable. So I'm going to say first name is going to take on a new value. We'll use the keyword let here for this example. Let first name equal, and it's going to equal what's in, I'm sorry, it's not first name, it's full name. Let full name equal whatever's in column B concatenated with whatever's in column C on the current row. So I'm looking on my current row, column B. And the way we concatenate is the ampersand sign, and then I'm going to concatenate in a string literal. So just quote space quote. So a string with only thing in it is a space. That way I don't want to smash the 2 names right next to each other like they're one name. I want a space between them. And then I will concatenate on the last name, which is in column C. I'm still going to go ahead and print on my debug.print, I'm still going to print row, but now let me print full name. And I should make sure that I've got that, I'm getting that filled in correctly. So go ahead and run that again. And it looks like, yeah, now I'm getting the full name showing up here. Okay. Questions here? Just so I can get a gauge for how, where you are in your understanding of VBA, just kind of show me on a scale of 0 to 5, how comfortable you are with what we've done so far. Like 0 is, I'm really having a hard time keeping up. 5 is, I totally got this. So 4 is, yes, I'm okay, good. Looks like we got 5s and 4s, mostly. Okay, so now the next part, address, I kind of went back and forth as I was thinking about this example, if we should do address as its own variable. Oops, because it's only, like the address is just one cell. But I think it's going to kind of break this problem down and make it a little bit more readable if I go ahead and put address into its own variable as well. So let's get address set up. Address equal, and then now address is in column D. So we'll just bring in column D. And then our city, state, and zip will be something really similar as well. Like it's going to be really similar to our first row we're concatenating 2, but here we're going to be concatenating 3 together. And so the city is, so that's E, F, and G. So E, oops. Concatenated with the space, and then concatenated with F. Make this a little bit larger. So this one's got 3 in it, E, F, and G. And now in my print, just as I'm kind of working through this, I'm going to print off full name, comma, address, and city, state, zip. And again, the printing here is just that debug.print is such a helpful statement for debugging, for getting your code working. You usually don't really want it in your code that's when it's done, but it's just like for debugging. So I'm going to go ahead and run this. And yeah, it looks like we've got the name, a tab, the address, a tab, and then city, state, and zip. If we want to, we can put a comma between the city and the state just by concatenating the comma in that part that is doing the concatenating. The truth is the post office wants this without the comma anyway. So I don't know, put it in if you want to, or don't put it in. There. Okay. So now I feel like I'm in control of the data that I'm dealing with. Now I just have to figure out how am I going to print this out to where I want it to go in the end. And I'm going to want that to go over here in column. I think I want to put it in column K. So I want a little space between. I've got column J here, but column K is where I'm going to want to put these. I think ultimately what I want is I want to put, the trick is I've got the 3 lines of the address. I'm going to put that here. And then I'm going to want to skip like 2 or 3 lines, kind of depending on what my, like how big my labels are and what font it's actually printing with and so forth. But I'm going to print the 3 lines of the address. I'm going to skip some lines and then print the next one, skip some lines, print the next one. So I think I'm going to start off by like doing the label every 10 rows. It's probably too big. But the nice thing about 10 is that if I want to kind of look down and see how it's going, it's a little easier for me to look at it and say, is, you know, this is the 10th one, so it should be on the 100th row. And then it'll be a simple adjustment later. So the thing is now I'm going to have to figure out which row I'm writing to independently from where I'm reading, because here I'm reading everything off the first row that has to write to, or from row 2, I've got to write to rows 2, 3, and 4, or 1, 2, and 3. Then I'll skip some, and then the next row I've got to write here. So this is going to advance at much more quickly. Like the output is going to advance much more quickly than the input, because it's got not only the 3 rows of data plus some spacing as well. So I'm going to keep a different variable for that one. And I think I'm just going to call that out row as an integer. And I think I'm going to start out row at 1. I should have called the other one in row. I have in row and out row. I don't know. Anyway, we got row and out row. Out row equals 1. Okay, so right here where I'm doing the debug.print, maybe I don't even need that debug.print now. So I'm going to comment it out just by putting a single quote in front of it, makes that into a comment. So it disables that line of code. And now I think I'm ready to write to my sheet. So cells, row number, out row, column number K, value is equal to first full name. have a couple of options here. I could like, at this point, I could change the value of out row to actually get ready for the next row that I'm going to write to. Or I could say, leave out row at 1 for this iteration of the loop. And then my next time I write out to it, write out to out row +1, and then write out to out row +2. I think I like that a little bit better because it's fewer lines of code. And it kind of helps me see like how far we are offset from the starting. But either approach would work. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and copy this 2 more times. And I'm going to print the address. And then I'm going to print the city state zip. And so my out row is 1. So I'm going to print this one on 1. This one, I'm going to add 1 onto it. And it's not going to change the value of out row. This is just saying whatever out row is, add 1 onto it. And that's the row I'm writing to. And this one I will add 2 to. And then once it's written that out, I'll go ahead and add on my 10 to my out row. So now I'm going to let out row equal what it used to be plus 10. So if I think about what this code is doing here, I'm giving out row a value of 1 to start with. I'm reading those values off of the sheet and getting them formatted in the format that I want with these 3 lines, putting them into these variables. And then I'm going to say, hey, on row number 1, that's what out row is, first time through, I'm going to put my full name. Then at row number 2, I'm putting the address. At row number 3, I'm putting the city, state, and zip. Then I'm advancing out row by 10 and moving my row. So now I'm getting ready to read the next line of data, and I'm preparing to write the next label 10 lines down from where the first one was written. So when I get to the top of the loop here, we'll read in the next data, and now out row will be 10. So I should write on row number 10. I'm sorry, it's going to add 10. It was 1 before, so it should write to 11, and then 11 plus 1 is 12. 11 plus 2 is 13. And it'll write the next block. It'll advance my out row and then go read the next in row and go forward. So I think I'm going to go ahead and step through this. So I'm going to scroll over so that my K is visible. And let's see, to bring up the toolbar that steps, that's called the debugging toolbar, I think. So I'm going to view toolbars and debug. Just dock that up here. Anyway, that's the button right here. This is the button on that toolbar. So if you don't have this toolbar showing in your editor, choose view, toolbars, debug. And I like to dock it. Some people like to leave it floating off to the side. I like to dock it here so it's right with the other ones. And this is the button that will let me go 1 line at a time through my code. So I'll launch this by saying, hey, I want to go 1 line at a time. And it turns out you don't get to see it actually do the variables 1 at a time because technically those variables all get allocated before the set procedure starts running. So you don't see those, but the rest of these lines we should see 1 at a time. So I'll step through here and I'm loading up those variables. Now, when I'm in break mode, I've got this yellow line here. If I hover over something, it'll tell me what's in it, usually. So yeah, I can see the full name is filled in there. My address is filled in there and so forth. So now I should be ready to write those things out. I'll continue stepping. Out goes full name, address, city, state, zip. Coming through, reading the next data in. And now writing out the next label at 11, 12, and 13. Probably way too much space. So I'm going to go ahead and stop my code by clicking on the stop button. And then instead of adding 10, why don't I add on, maybe only add on like 7. And so go ahead and clear off my existing data. And then maybe I think I'm ready to run the whole thing. So instead of stepping, I'll click on the little green play button. And that should just run through and put those labels in there. Okay, I'm gonna do one more thing on this example, and that is because I might want to adjust this number like when it runs.
Before we move on.
Yeah.
I have another question. Stepping through my code, it works well until I try to do the false cells out row equals K for full name.
It gives you an error.
I get application defined or object defined error.
Okay, it's probably error number 104 and
Yes.
1004. When you get that error, the most common cause for that at your stage of programming is you're trying to refer to a cell that doesn't exist. So my guess is your out row is 0. And so you're trying to refer to row number 0 to write out. So unless you have a line up here that sets out row to its initial value, it's going to be starting at 0. All numeric values start at 0.
I do, I have out row equals 1.
Okay, so that was my guess. Let's take a look.
So here's that. So we can see it filling up my.
Okay, let's see what's okay. And what is out row? Out row is 1. So let's go ahead and copy out the cells.
Should I
Copy that. Take that to your immediate window and let's just see if that can. Question mark.
Oh, yeah, just a question.
Paste. Okay, that executed just fine. And that's how we go. Full name, so print full name, let's see what full name is. That certainly looks good as well. All right, and go ahead and step, let me see the error again.
And then
So yeah, it's just saying an error, you can read, you can understand both those two things, you should be able to write into it, hit debug. Okay, so anytime you get something that's like befuddling, this one, I don't know what this is. It's probably a good idea to like save, close Excel, open it up again, and then we'll see what we got.
okay,
This next part that I'm going to do is like not really necessary for this. It's probably not anything you're going to be tested on. So I'm going to go ahead and advance on this little part while you're doing that.
Okay.
And then if you still have that error after you close and start again, let's take a look.
okay.
So the one thing that would be nice here is to be able to say, I want to clear out column number K here. Like step 1, when you run, wipe out whatever's in column number K, column K. And so I'm going to do that before I get to my loop. I'm just going to say, I want to clear whatever in column K. And I can do that by saying columns. So this is the set of all the columns on my sheet. And then I will address that by number. Now, in the cells, I can refer to a column by its letter, but in the columns method, I have to use the number. And so K is the 11th letter of the alphabet. So I'm going to say columns 11 dot clear. And that will just wipe that out. In fact, I'll step through it so you can see it happen. So stepping 1 at a time, that just clears out everything in that column. And I'll set it to run from here. Just hit the play button to continue from here, and that'll run that back in. So that's one way to get to that column. Let me just show you another one. Another way. Will it work?
It worked.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's frightening. So yeah, so I'm glad to hear that. So just one other way to refer to an entire column is, let me comment this one out. And I'm going to refer to any row or any cell in that column. So cells, row number 1, column number K. And then from there, I can say dot entire column. That's another way to refer to that range. That's the whole column. And so from there, I can say dot clear as well. There's an entire row and an analog for both rows and entire row if you want to refer to entire rows or columns. Let's see, anyway, that'll do the same thing. Okay, any questions on this example?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for the cells dot entire column, can I have my row number be anything other than 1?
Yeah.
And it would still work? Okay,
It can be like 1 million,
okay,
and that'll work just fine. Can't be 2 million because there are only 1.04 million rows on a worksheet. but. Any. Can be any cell. In fact, the entire column can be any range. If you have a multi-column range, then you say dot entire column, it means the entire column for that, whatever range that was on.
You make K an integer and put that as like K as 1 to 5. Or actually like 11, say we're trying to get like columns 11, 12, and 13. You do like 4K as,
Oh, if I wanted to identify a multi-column range here, I wouldn't use cells, I'd use range.
oh, okay.
And then I would say I would say K1 through, you want to go to like M1.
Oh. You use a colon there for through.
Yeah, that's a multi-cell range. Or let me just go, we'll just play with this and then we'll move on. So just so you can see it, I'm going to select it instead of clearing it. Yeah, I'm going to zoom out here so we can see those. So I'll run that and it will select all three of those. But like another way, there's like another way to do it yet, and that is you can say K:M. Is that right? Or is it KKM? I think it's, let me unselect this. Yeah. So that is just like, that's just like the same syntax. It's like the Excel way to say, refer to an entire column or range of. Yeah, so we could do that without the entire column down here. We can just say range KM or range K. Oh yeah, K:K would be just column K. Okay, let me clear that. All right, and yeah, that's like, you're not going to need to know that for the exam. I guess I don't think I've talked to you about that. You won't need that for the exam, because mostly, I remember the exam right. I haven't taught 201 for probably 10 years. Probably the same exam though. Yeah, it's mostly not dealing with whole entire columns, but dealing with like ranges. Okay, so first example. Any questions? Can you just kind of show me, and this will be different based on how comfortable you were coming in. How useful was that as an example to review 0 to 5? 0 is like, I didn't learn anything. Let's move on.
The labels.
Yeah, this whole thing we just did. So helpful. Okay. Let's go ahead and we may come back and like parse this existing data here to work kind of dealing with batches, but let's come to distance first. So this sheet is showing the distance between selected cities, like the distance in miles between selected cities here in Utah. So how far is it from Salt Lake City to St. George? It's 303 miles. How far is it from Murray to West Jordan? 7 miles. Logan to Orem, 120 miles. And so this grid just has all that data in it. And what I'd like to do is I would like to, instead of having a table, I'd like to have a list that shows this. So I want to take this same information and organize it so that it says from Salt Lake to West Valley City, 11 miles. Next line, from Salt Lake to Provo, 45 miles. From Salt Lake to West Jordan, 13 miles. I want to read the data off that grid and put it here into this list. Ooh. What's that?
I don't know. I was just thinking, oh, this seems like it's going to be complicated.
Well, it's going to involve something that beginning students often struggle with, and that's going to be a nested loop. So what we're going to have to do here is we're going to say, listen, we've got to go across this data. We've got to read that data and plug it in here. And then we've got to do whatever process we develop for that. We've got to do that same thing for the rest of the table. And so we're going to have a loop that reads across these columns, and then we'll put that loop inside another loop that goes across these rows. And yeah, this is not straightforward. This is not what you learned on the first day of VBA, because this is a little bit more advanced stuff. But again, we always want to start this off by breaking it down and say, let me bite off a smaller part of this problem, rather than try to figure out both loops together at once. I mean, listen, I've been programming in VBA since 1995, like when it was released. I've been teaching VBA since 1995. And I still would not try to write this nested loop, even something that's like really relatively simple as this. I would not try to write this at once. I would start by saying, let's get the inside loop working first, and then we'll get the outside loop working. All right, so I'm going to just make another sub procedure, and I'll do this one above here. So sub I'll just call this distance list. All right, I think I'm gonna need an out row that I'm keeping track of where I'm writing out to. And I think I'm gonna need a column that I'm reading from. And then I'll also need a row that I'm reading from. Let me go ahead and kind of set all those variables up to begin with. So let me dim out row as an integer. We dim, I'll just call it call as an integer and row as an integer. Now I know that ultimately I'm going to have to make that row go down, 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 down. But I think what I'd like to do is I'd like to start with saying, listen, let me just focus on row number 2. So let me start off by saying row equals 2. And then I'm still going to use row when I'm referring to the cells, but then my code will kind of be ready to move on once I get row changing and we have another loop going. Okay, so my out row is going to start at row 2 as well. And now I think I'm ready to do a loop. Now, the do loop that we did, the do loop is wired to say, listen, I'm going to loop a bunch of times. And every time I start the loop, like every time I finish that loop and get ready to start again, check and make sure if I should be in or out. Like, look, has the condition changed such that I'm ready to be done here? That's, so there's another loop called the for loop, which is a little bit different. The idea behind the for loop is it says, listen, what we're about to do is so common. Like we have to take this integer, this row, and we've got the column, and we're going to run the same code with column 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. We're going to run the same thing with all those numbers. We're going to move, we want this loop to happen, and we want to change an integer across a certain range while it's running. Could we do that with a do loop? Totally. It's exactly what we did in that first example. But it's such a common task that they made a loop just specifically for it. It's called the for loop. The big difference between the for and the next loop is that when the for loop starts, I have to know how many times I'm going to iterate when I start the loop. The do loop says just start looping and keep checking until we find out if we're done. The for loop says you are going to start, you're going to run while my control variable starts at some value, and you'll run all the way through it's done with the other value, and you have to know that when the loop starts. So let's look at the syntax for that. For something next. So this is like the structure of the loop. So for starts the loop, next ends the loop. Now, because this loop is designed to move a variable across a range, you've got to give it a variable to work with. And in fact, you've got to tell it what's the first value that variable is going to take on. And the variable that I want to move across these columns here is going to be my variable called call. So for call equals, and then you see how we've got this row equals 2, out row equals 2. I'm actually putting a little assignment statement right here as well. And so inside my for loop, it starts off by saying, we're going to give the control variable its initial value. And so we're saying, hey, start call out at 2, and that will set the value in that variable to 2. And then we tell it how far is it going to go. And I do that by saying the word 2, and I tell it where I want it to end. And it looks like J, J is the 10th letter of the alphabet. And so it'll be 2 to 10. I cannot use the letters. I can't say for call B to J. It's got to be numbers.
So does I guess VBA know that we're talking about columns and not rows because we've called this integer column?
That's a good question. So does VBA go, oh, you're going to probably do something with columns because this thing is like call? And the answer is no. All VBA knows is that's a variable. We happen to call it COL. I mean, it could have been a military thing. We're talking about kernels here or something. It's the Kentucky Fried Chicken example. And so it just is like, that's a variable name. I don't have any inkling to what you're going to do. Now we're going to use it to move across the columns, but the interpreter at this point just goes, great, it's just a loop. In fact, let's just go ahead and I'm just going to print this off. Debug.print. Oh, And it should print 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Do one more thing at the end here. I'm going to put that debug.print after the loop as well. So I'm going to put this one. And you probably don't need to type this part in because it's just to kind of, if you want, but this is just to kind of make sure we understand what's going on here with the loop. Okay. So it's going to print 2, it's going to print 2. Let's kind of think about how, in fact, let's just go ahead and step through it. I've got my range here. I'm going to click on my step button. Give our initial values. Okay, so this set call to 2, and so when this prints, it's going to print 2. We get to the next changes the value to the next number higher. And so it'll be 3. We'll come back to the top of the loop and we'll print 3. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And now it's done. But when we hit that next, what it does is it actually moves that variable to its next value. It's actually, and you'll see it when it prints here, it's going to print 11 because the reason we get out of the loop is that the variable goes out of range. So this will continue to execute as long as the variable is in the range 2 to 10 inclusive. But when I hit this final, I printed with 10, I hit next again, it makes it 11, and that's what lets it out of the loop. It's because X goes to an invalid value from the range that we specified that it lets out. Okay. So show me comfort level on the for loop, 0 to 5. 5, 4, 5. Okay. So now I don't need to be printing this stuff off. Get rid of those. Now I think I'm ready to, I think I'm going to start by writing my miles out. Okay, so I want that to go into column N. So cells, row number, my output row, out row, column number N, the value of that cell. I'm not changing the formula, I'm not changing the background color, I'm changing the value of that cell, is going to be equal to, like the first time through, it's got to be that cell right there. So I got to think about how to do that, but not just look at B2, but using my row and column variables to be able to pull that value out. And so that is going to be cells, row number, what row?
Out row.
The louder?
Out row.
So out row is where I'm putting the data out to, but this is where I'm reading data off of the cell.
Oh, so that'd just be row.
Yeah, that's why I called it row, because that's the row I'm reading from. And which column am I reading from?
B.
It's column B, but it's only B because it's the first time through the loop. The next time through the loop, I want to read from column C.
So it's column, it would be row, comma, call.
That's right, row, comma, call. So, yeah, that's why I call them row and column, so that, I make sure when I'm putting them here, I'm talking about the row and the column. And so that, in fact, anytime I've got I'm identifying a cell with 2 numbers in VBA, it is always row first and then column. There's never an exception to that. So it's a little confusing because it's backwards. When I use a range like A1, it's column first and then row, unfortunately. But when it's 2 numbers, row first, then column. All right, so I think I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to step up to that point. I'm going to make this a little bit smaller, but we can still see all the code. Oh, good, you can see it. So now, as I'm stepping through, I should see it put 0 into distance. And it should put, so what should it do next? I just put that one in. I'm to the next iteration of the loop. Oh,
Should put 3 in 2 or 2N.
so we read that 0, we put it here. And what do we want to read? What should it be reading? Oh man, did I do that wrong? So let's just write. So call is now 3. And so call is here, row is still 2. So I'm going to read out of row 2, column 3. Row 2, column 3, it's going to read the 11. And it's going to put it in out row is what?
Two,
Still two. So where's it gonna put it?
the same cell.
Yeah, it's gonna write right over the top of it. So let's step and see if that's right. Yeah, so it did, so that's what it did. That's not what I meant it to do. But if I keep going here, it's gonna keep writing those numbers right over the top of the same place because I'm never changing the out row. So, great, I'm gonna stop that. And yeah, this is why I write this a little bit at a time. You know, I wanna keep this simple while I'm making these little mistakes. And so what did I forget to do?
Advance out row.
Yeah, out row equals what it used to be. Plus one. In the last example, I put like let in front of both these kind of statements, let, but it's not necessary and it's almost never used. But it's just, it helps me to remember, that's an assignment. Okay, so now if I run this, it's gonna put them in, as they go down. That's great. Okay, but now I've got the distance in. Now I got to put where it's from and where it's going to. Yeah, I'm gonna actually copy that line because it's going to be similar. So my from is not column N, it's column L. And I'm reading from, let's see, so from, it doesn't really matter. I mean, the distances are the same from and regardless of the direction that you go. So I'm going to think of my from as being this, what the labels are in column A, and my to being in what's in that row.
Okay.
So I'll say first one will be from Salt Lake to Salt Lake. So let me think about the second one, from Salt Lake to West Valley City. So I'm putting in from, and so I want to read row number still on my row, but column number what? I'm going to read this Salt Lake City. And so that's going to be, instead of looking at the column that has the actual miles in it, I'm going to look at column 1. That's where the label is. So I'm going to read off of my current row, column 1, and put that into my out row on column L. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of run that one again so we can see that part working. So I'm putting in let me go ahead and wipe out the distance so we see those go in as well. I'm putting in the distance. And now I'm putting in where it's from. Go to the next one. So these are all from this is all from Salt Lake to these other places. So now we got to get the 2 going in there. Again, the 2 is going to be really similar to the from. So I'm going to write not to column L, but to column M. And now I'm going to read from, let me go ahead and get rid of my row and my column here. Which row am I going to pull the to city from? That's always going to come from row 1. And which column is it going to come from?
Column.
Yeah, column call, because the first time it's coming from column 2, then column 3, column 4, it's going to track right across the same ways that the miles are coming out. So now I think I've got it doing like this. I think I've got the Salt Lake block running. I'm just going to go ahead and run the whole thing. And that looks great. From Salt Lake to Salt Lake is 0. From Salt Lake to West Valley, 11. Salt Lake to Provo, 45. Looks great. So 1 down and 18 to go or 17 to go. But the thing is, this part is doing exactly what I want to do. I just want that to happen over and over again. And anytime I say, I've got some code that's doing something, I just want it to happen multiple times, it's going to be a loop. The fact that it's already a loop makes it a little more confusing to think about, but it doesn't change what we do. And so I'm just going to tab this in. I want to kind of see the structure of the loop. I'm going to put that inside a loop, another for loop. This is going to be for row equals 2, and then we want to start at 2 and go all the way to 19. So row equals 2 to 19. And then we'll put next down here at the very end. So you'll notice that the first time through this loop, it sets row equal to 2. And that's how we started it off when we made that first loop. So I don't need this line anymore. So this line where we were saying the default value for row, it wouldn't hurt to leave it there. I'm setting it to 2, and then I'm setting it to 2 again here, but I'm going to get rid of it. And so, but now you see that this loop is going to behave exactly the same way the first time through, because row is set to 2. It'll go through and do all the 10 iterations for that row. When this loop finishes, it'll be like, great, I'm done. Oh, we got another next. We go back up here. That's going to change the value of row to go up by 1. So now row will be 3, and then column is going to go from 2 to 10 again, and it will now go that same process, but on row 3, and then the same process on row 4, and so forth. So let's just go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and step through it. My click finger is going to get tired. Okay, so now we're done with that loop. We should get to the next. And what's row right now? Right now, row is 2. When I hit next, it's going to go up, and it's going to check to say, hey, am I still in bounds? And we'll go, yep, still in bounds. Stay in the loop and keep going. Now we're going West Valley City to all these other places. And we'll get through with West Valley City, and we're moving on to the next one, should be Pro. And we're ready to finish that out. Write it out. And so now I've got, you should be able to look in this table and see all those distances from Draper to West Valley, 18, from Riverton to Orem, 25. One thing I'd like to do here, so any questions before we move on? One little more thing to do on this example. Okay, so I think what I'd like to do is that, do I really need to know in this table that Salt Lake to Salt Lake is 0 miles? I don't know that that's useful information. And so, do this. Let's say right in here, this whole block of code here, I want to be conditional. I only want to execute this block of code under a certain condition. How can I tell if I want to execute that block of code? What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get rid of the lines that are 0.
We could say if the distance does not equal 0, then execute it.
So if the distance is greater than 0, then we want to include it. That's a good one. I think that's the way that we'll do it. How else could we tell?
See if the values of cells row 1 and cells 1 column are the same.
Yeah, like these two, like where I'm putting here my 2 and my from, if these two expressions are the same as each other, that's also one that we don't have to write. So and either one of those will work just fine for this example. I think the simpler one is if my distance is greater than 0. So I'm going to come in here now and put an if statement. If, and then just get the syntax here, the then is like the raw syntax. I got to have something in between the if and the then that evaluates to true or false. We'll put that in just a moment. Let me go ahead and get the ending part of this in. And if. Okay, so if what's in there is true, we execute what's between the then and the end if. If not, we just skip right past it. So if, and then see, here's where our distance value is. I'm just going to copy that. I just want to say, hey, if that value is greater than 0, then do this writing. Nice. So I'm going to go ahead and clear this out by hand, since I have those headers in there. There's a couple of ways I could deal with that problem. I could just say, you know what, clear those columns off and then write those headers back in. Or I could do a little more work. I could find that and just delete off the part that has the data that I want to delete off. But I don't think that's stuff that's going to help me for the exam. So I'm just going to skip those. And now we should run this again. I'm gonna go ahead and step through because we'll see it on the very first time through, because the very first one is Salt Lake to Salt Lake. So the value that we're getting ready to write is, I'm gonna highlight this. Then just take it to my immediate window. I'm in break mode. Break mode is when I've got this yellow line here. I can see what those things evaluate to. So that is 0 right now. So the statement that's here is 0 is greater than 0. Is that a true or a false statement? 0 is greater than 0. True or false? That's false. So because what's between the if and then is false, we're going to skip right to the end if. So we'll step there and boom, we're to the end if. We go to the next and we're back up to the top. Now, what does that evaluate to? Now it's 11. Now the statement here is 11 is greater than 0. True or false?
True.
True. So now we're going to come into that block and we'll write that one in. And we're doing all the writing and the incrementing of our out row inside that if, so that when we write, we increment, and when we don't, we don't. We'll go ahead and run this the rest of the way out. And now you can look down, you can see we don't have any zeros in our distance column because we checked. If it's 0, don't write it. I should say, only write it if it's greater than 0. Okay. Questions?
This might be like a super basic question, but I've struggled with the whole semester.
Well, we can't take a super basic question, but we can take a visual basic question.
When I select like a large chunk of cells, it won't let me delete all of them at the same time. I'll go also like this and go delete, I'll just delete that first cell.
Okay, you're probably hitting backspace instead of delete.
Oh,
That's my guess.
that's
Select a bunch. Yeah,
okay. Thank you.
glad to do it. Okay, I think that's the end of this example, unless there's other questions on this. Show me how helpful this one was to you, 0 to 5. 4, 5, 5, okay. Okay, so I think the next thing that's going to end up on the exam is like some batch processing. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to come back to our labels sheet. And I would like to say, listen, let's suppose that for whatever reason, we've got this set of mailing labels. We've got like this Excel worksheet that's been set up to do mailing labels. And what I'd like to do is bring this back into like a regular set of data, like one customer per row. So doing the opposite of the first thing that we tackled. So talk to me, what do you think? How would we tackle this problem? What's kind of like the first thing we want to do as we're trying to solve this problem?
I guess I would think about trying to see how I can take things that are all in one column and at least see if I can break them down into taking the column and putting it into just rows.
Oh, okay. So
instead.
what you're saying is that before we worry about trying to loop across all this data, let's just get the parts, kind of the parts built that are going to split this. Like, see that we can split that into a first and a last name. This one doesn't get split. This one gets split into a city, state, and zip. Okay, that's fine. I probably would have made the loop first, but I think this is a fine approach. Let's go ahead and take it. I'm going to put this at the very top, and I'm going to call this one labels to data. Sub labels to data. All right. So I think let's put this. Why don't we go ahead and put the data into column C, starting in column C. So we'll hit first and last name into to C and D. All right, so let me just go ahead and say that. So let's just say it's cells, row number 1, column number C, value is equal to,
See.
what we've got to do is we want to take that whatever is in A1 and we want to split it. Now, as long as we don't have names that have spaces in them, then I think we can just simply use the split. I think you've learned the split function. Let's just take a look at split with this data hard-coded, and then we'll take a look. So split's a function that takes some string, and then the first argument is string. The second argument is, what do you want to, you want to split this into parts, but how do I know? What's the delimiter to know how to split the parts? In this case, it's going to be a space. Now, the trouble is this thing returns like a whole set of things. This is going to return a set of two things. And I think our simplest way is not to actually deal with a set independently, but to say, you know what, I just want one of these. So I'm going to want like number one of this set. And so that says, great, split that by the space and bring back, wait a minute, why did it bring back the second one? I didn't. It's because these sets start counting at 0.
Oh,
And so if I want the first one, I have to put the 0, and that'll bring back the Bridget.
okay.
Maddening. It's maddening that it starts with 0, but there's a good reason it starts with 0. And it's probably more than you want to hear at the moment. But what this is returning, it's actually returning a thing called an array of values. Not just a single value, it's an array of values. And arrays start counting at 0. So what it's returning, and there's like a longer explanation for why arrays start counting at 0. You don't need that for the test. Let's not spend any time on every says. So you can just think of this bringing back a set, and it happens, kind of a quirk of this set that it brings back is that it starts counting at 0. Okay, so if I want, so I should be able to take that expression there, that's the first name, and instead of course, instead of looking at that hard-coded, let's go ahead and read that value. So cells, row number 1, column number 1, dot value. So we're saying, hey, get the value out of that cell, feed that into the split function, which is going to make that array, that whole set of values, and then give me back the number 0, 1 of those. And that's what's going to go into cell 1C. Now, we're going to have like an input row and an output row. So why don't we go ahead and get this line set up to use those variables? So let's kind of, while we're working through this, we know that we're going to have some loop that's reading across the data, and then it's going to have to write over here to the data. They're not going to be matched up because that's the whole point. This is really vertical, and we're trying to make it go horizontal. So let's go ahead and dim those two. Let's dim an in row as an integer, and dim an out row as an integer. And right now, because we're not doing the loops yet, let's just set those to their values. So right now, my in row is 1. My out row is 1. But while I'm practicing this data, so where I'm reading, which side am I reading the value on? Am I reading the value on the right of the equal sign or the left? I'm reading from one place and
right on the left.
So the place that I'm reading from is the right. Remember, these assignment statements always take what's on the right and put it on the left. So here I'm reading from cell A1. Let me go ahead and make that A, so we can see that's the column. I'm reading from that cell A1. I'm feeding that value directly into the split function and saying, give me the number 0, 1. So give me the number 0 element that got split. And so this one is really my in row. And then this one is my out row. I just changed a 1 to in row, which has the value of 1. I changed this one to out row, which has a value of 1. This should do exactly the same thing. I'll run this, and that should give me Bridget in B. Let's see, we're going to get the first name, last name, address, city, state, zip. So that's going to be 6 columns. So why don't we just go ahead and clear off those columns? C, D, E, F, G, H. So let me just do this. I'm going to say range C:(H) dot clear. They still make CNH sugar from Hawaii. All right, so I run that, it should clear it out and then write that back again.
See.
Okay, I think I'm ready to now do the last name. The last name says, hey, I'm writing to a different column. I'm writing to D, so it's exactly the same. I mean, it's very similar to that line that we just wrote, but I'm writing to column D. And I'm still reading from that one cell because it's a full name. But now I don't want the number 1 element. I don't want the number 0 element. I want the number 1 element. So that should say, hey, read what's in A1, split it, and now take the second part of it and put that in column D. Whereas the other one, splitting it, taking the first part, putting it in column C. If I run that, it should give me first and last name. Okay, so now, the next one's easy because it's just reading the whole cell and putting it in A, B, C, D, E, column E. So I'll copy this line again. No split necessary. This is column A. Now my in row is going to go up. And I think what I'm going to do here. Well, let's see. Let's get rid of the rest of the split part. I think what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to go ahead and make in row go up by 1. In row equals what it used to be plus 1. So now I'm reading that next in row. Knowing something about how they're going to test you on this, I'm changing my mind about how I want to do this. So what we're going to do is, instead of just like talking about the cells that we're after, we're going to advance to the next block of data. So we're actually going to move our active cell. So let's have our in row be driven by the active cell instead of this variable. Okay. So I'm going to back off this line here. I'm back off both of these lines here. So we're back to just where we were here. And let's change how we're doing in row. I'm going to work with the active cell. So let's start by making sure that our active cell is A1. So range A1 dot select. And now my in cell here, I'm just going to read this. This is going to be my active cell.
Active cell dot value.
Yeah, so instead of cells, whatever my in row is, I'm going to get rid of in row because I think, yeah, at least back in the day when I was teaching this class, like the exam had an example that was more like this. Maybe that's more than I should say. I don't know. But I'm gonna do that active cell here as well. ACT, okay. So let me get rid of my in row because I don't think we're gonna use in row at all. We're gonna use the out row to keep track of where we're writing to. In row is gonna be here. Okay, that should do exactly the same thing. I'm gonna run it and make sure that it does. Oh, active cell, not value. Okay, so now I'm going to want to get now to my next one. Next one is going to be really similar to this one, so I'm going to just copy it. My out row, A, B, C, D, E, I'm going to go this into E. But now there's no splitting involved. So I'm going to get rid of my split, and then everything after value is going to go away. And this would just write first and last name into E. But what I want to do is get the address. And so relative to my active cell, where is my address right now?
One below it.
Yeah, it's one below it. So I'm just gonna say, my plan here, when I get to doing this loop, my plan here is gonna be, let's find this block of data and then process it. And then let's jump to the next block of data and then process it. So rather than kind of move myself down, I'm gonna say, let's keep ourselves here, process this label, and then move to the next label. And then process that label. So instead of active cell.value, I'm gonna, from the active cell, I'm gonna offset. How many rows? One row. How many columns? 0 columns. And that's going to read in the active cell down one row, and it's going to write it to column E on whatever my out row is. So let me narrow these down. Let me zoom out a bit. And so I'm thinking that's going to get my address. So now I've got my address going in. Okay. Now I got to get the city, state, and the zip and split it apart. This is going to be a little more of a challenge. So in fact, this one's going to be complex enough that I think I want another variable to hold the address, because like referring to the address by something like this, that's kind of longer and a little bit more, it's just going to be kind of ugly to work with. So let me put the address into a variable. I'm going to dim address as a string. So address equals, and then I'm just going to read. So someone tell me, here's the statement that I used to read in. Oh, sorry, address is one of the room. I'm going to call this city, state, zip. What we called it before. Okay, so here's how I'm reading the address, the street address in. Someone tell me, what do I have to do to change this so that it will read in the city, state, and zip? So this is how we read in address. You got to change just one thing here to get city, state, and zip. And what is it that I change?
Offset 2, comma.
Yeah, that's right. Just change the offset 1 to offset 2. So my active cell is still here, A1. And now we're going to offset 2. And that will put city, state, zip into that variable. So I'll have New York City, comma, New York, and then the zip code. So now I think what I'm going to want, I think I'm actually also going to want a city, a state, and a zip. So I'm going to go make those. We could skip these variables and we could write this right out to the sheet. I think it will make more sense if we actually have those 3 variables. So I'm going to make a city, a state, and a zip variable. All right, how am I going to get the city? So now I've got my city, state, zip variable here that has this New York City, NY 10184. And now I just want to get the city off of this.
Are we gonna have to do something with splitting again?
We could do it with split, yeah. What would we split? And how would we split? So I'll get started. Split. I'm going to split city, state, zip. Comma, and then I'll tell it to bring, one of the elements out. So what do I split on is the question.
The comma.
Comma. And then which do I want? What element do I want? The number
0.
0. That should give me the city. I'm going to go ahead and run it right up to there. Step, 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 step. So I can get a peek at city. And, I haven't run city yet. So I'll step one more step. And city is New York City. Excellent. Now, the challenge. How am I going to get New York off of this? Let me make another variable. I'm gonna run this out. I'm gonna make another variable just called state and zip. State zip as string. So let's get the state and zip next. State zip. Okay, so I've just copied my city line and I've changed it to my state zip line. Again, here, one little change I have to make to get my state and zip into its own variable. What do I change?
The 0 into a 1.
Yeah, I change the last 0 into a 1, and that'll give me my state and zip. And again, I'm going to run it to that point. Oops, sim, that's dim. And state zip is, ooh, a little bit of a problem here. Can you see? I don't know if you can see. Let me zoom in. Windows plus. Whoa. As we look at state zip, can you see the little problem here? I'm after
So space.
the space, right? Because I split on the comma. And so now what's after the comma? Space and Y. I've got a couple of options here. One is I can split not on a comma, but on a comma space. I could put the space in what I'm splitting by, and then it would say, okay, I'm splitting this in based on the comma space throughout the comma space, and then take the other things. That's one way to do it. What I worry about that is I can imagine like someone missed the space. The comma is going to be there, but maybe the space isn't. So I'm going to do this instead. Windows minus. So let's do this. This is going to come back with that space on it. And this is just going to tell me if you've seen this function in class called trim. You've seen trim? You haven't seen trim? Well, you probably won't need it for the test then. But what trim does, it just takes off leading and trailing spaces. Like it's so common to say, I got an extra space on the front of this, how do I get rid of it? They made a function for it, trim. And so now if there's a space, it'll get rid of it. There's nothing to get rid of, that's just fine. Okay, so now I think I'm ready to get my state. So if I think about what city state is right now, it's NY space 1004. Let's do this. Let's get the zip. Let me get the zip next. Zip equals. Now we could split again. We could split on the space. But we've split enough already. What's the interesting thing about zip codes and state abbreviations? Well, what else do we know about zip codes and state abbreviations? We know something about their structure.
States abbreviations should only have letters in them.
State abbreviations will only have letters. Zip codes only have numbers. That's true. What else do we know? What is a rule you could say if I'm going to abbreviate a state? The state abbreviation has to be fill in the letters. 2 letters. How about zip codes? Do we know how long the zip codes are? 5. Now, depending on our data, there might be some in here that are like 9-digit zip codes. We don't have any 9-digit zip codes. So we know that we've got just 5-digit zip codes. So why don't we do it this way? Let's say that our zip is equal to, and I just want to say the first 2 characters of my state zip. I'm guessing you've seen the left function.
I think we have, because we did like length, like len, and then left and right. Oh yeah.
Okay. So I just want the left of what?
Space.
State zip.
State zip.
Oh, never mind.
And how many do I want? 2. Sorry. That's state. That's state, not zip. Zip is what?
Right. 5.
Right, yeah. The right of zip, of state zip. 5 characters.
But if we had to think about having like 9-digit zip codes, could we say like zip code is state zip everything but the left two most characters?
Yes, you could count. So the question is, could we say, hey, we want everything but those characters? Yeah. In fact, why don't we do that? Let's take a look at this one. We'll comment this one out and we'll look at exactly what you're
Okay.
suggesting. So yeah, so their state zip is NY. What's zip right here? Yeah, so zip is good. 10184, state is New York. So we've got those split out. And of course, I can see those when I hover because I'm in break mode. I actually ran my code one line at a time until I got to the end sub. So, but the question is, oh, but what if we had 9-digit ones? So I'm going to comment this one out. Comment this. This one assumes 5-digit zip codes. Here's one that doesn't assume 5-digit zip codes. So zip equals, now there's 3 functions that we use for like pulling strings apart. Left and right, the leftmost characters, the rightmost characters. There's one called mid. Mid says, I want to take something out of the middle of a string. And so left and right each take one number to say, how many characters do you want? Now, the mid says, it takes 2. It says, where do you want to start in the middle? And how many do you want to take? So I'm going to say zip equals mid of state zip. Starting where? Look at here's my state zip right here. If I start at 1, it'll start with the end. So where do I want to start?
4.
1, 2, 3, 4. Start at 4. Now I don't know how many to take. Should I take 5 or should I take 9? Or actually 10, because a 9-digit zip code usually has a hyphen in it.
The function to do until the end.
Ah, there is. You just don't put it. You don't tell how many characters to take, but it takes the rest. Yeah, I think we're doing good. I'm gonna go ahead and run to there. Oh, I'm too far. And now my zip should still be the proper zip code. Yeah, so it's still reading it, but it's taking a very different approach. It's saying start at the 4th character and just give me the rest of the characters. I like it. I think okay, now that we've got the state and the zip, I think we just have to write them out to the sheet.
Yeah.
So let me get my last one that I wrote out here. Wrote out to E, and this is going to be now to F and G. So let me write to F, and that's just going to be state. And then G is going to be zip.
And then we'll need to include city as well.
Did I skip city?
Yeah.
Oh, I did. So let's go ahead and copy these again. So F is city. And then G is state, and then H is zip code.
Awesome. That's so cool.
Now, at this point, we've written out everything we need to for this row. I think I'm ready to increment my out row. So I think I'm just going to say, time to make out row 1 bigger. Out row equals out row plus 1. Okay. Now, how am I gonna find the next block of data?
You need to advance all active cell down to the next group.
Advance our active cell to the next group. Any ideas?
Active cell end.
Ah, yeah, the end method is what it is. Megan, were you gonna say something?
Yeah.
So, and it is so common that we have like large blocks of empty space and then blocks that are defined by contiguous data. That just in navigating Excel, it's like, you know what, we want to go to the end of the contiguous data. And in fact, the way you do it is like control down arrow, right? So I'm here, I want to go to the end of this contiguous data, control down arrow. I want to go to the end of the blank data, control down arrow again. Like we do this twice in a row. Now, let me tell you something. Like before they invented the control key, we had to have other ways. They weren't nearly as nice to do this. And the way we used to do it back in the ancient times was we used the end key. So does your keyboard have an end key on it?
Mine doesn't.
Mine goes.
It does. If you have an end key, you can just try this. It's a 2-stroke sequence. Watch what happens right down here in the bottom left-hand corner of Excel when I hit the end key. Watch what happens. End. It put me in, I'm now in end mode. And now if I hit the down arrow, it's like equivalent to hitting control down arrow. It takes 2 sequences. I can do it again. Hit end, down arrow, and take me to the next block. That's the reason that the VBA method to do this is called end. Because that's the way we used to do it. It used to be hit the end key, and it's like, and then which direction? End, down. So here's what we're going to do. Our active cell right now is on A1. And I'm going to come right here. In fact, let me just do this in the immediate window. We come here and say active cell dot end. And in parentheses, I get, these choices to choose from. I can choose down, left, right, or up. I'm going to do down. Now, when you hit control down arrow on your keyboard, it actually selects a different cell. But in this case, this hasn't selected the cell yet. If we want to, this just refers to that cell. So if I was to print the address of this cell, let me print the row of this cell. What row is that going to show me? My active cell is A1 right now. I'm saying from the active cell, do the end down. We're not selecting, we're just referring to that cell. And I'm asking for the row that cell is on. Which row will that be? Yeah, 3. So this refers to A3. From A3, what would I do? You go down to where I really want to be. I do it again. So this is the operation that I want to do on the active cell. But what I want to do is from the active cell, I want to go to A3. And then from there, what do I want to do?
Do
it again. This looks weird. End XL down, end XL down. Because this identifies a cell. And then that cell has a method called end, which also identifies a cell. And that cell has a method called end, which now identifies a different one. So I run this one, I should get row 8. Row 8. Oh, it's because I was on the wrong one. Let me go back to A1. It's my active cell. And let me run it. And I think that's going to refer to just where we want to be. If I was to select that one and run it again, it should be 15. So that is going to find my next block. And the nice thing about this one is it will find it regardless of how much space there is. If we knew for sure that it was every 8, these were blocks of 8, then we could advance it by 8. Yeah, we can say active cell equals, or our active cell dot offset 8 dot select, and that would select the next one. Now, oh yeah, in fact, I actually do want to select it. So instead of just printing that out, instead of showing the row, I want to select it. I want to make that the active cell. Oh, that was a little spider on my screen. There's a bug on my code. Okay. So now if I just run this line, it should select that next block. Run it again, it should select the next.
Oh, wow.
And just to prove, let's just say that for whatever reason, some of these are like different spaces in between. It should still work the same because it's based on contiguous block of data, contiguous block of spaces. Oops, here's the first one, here's the second one. Here's the third one. Okay, so after I have done all the copying from my first place, now change what I'm going to be writing to for the output and change what my active cell is going to be. I can put a couple comments on this. Adjust, set the new outline, set the new row to write to, set the new output row. Set the new output row. And then advance to the new input row. Right, so I'm going to run this again, and the only difference that we should see visually is that it's going to end up over here now on Talbot Bouillon. Now, if I run it again, what's it going to do?
Same thing.
It's going to take the information from this block and put it here, because running it again is going to like reset my out row to 1. When we're going to run it again, we'll see that it's pulling in the data from.
We want to also select A1.
That's right, because we're selecting A1. That's right. We weren't selecting A1, very good. If we weren't selecting A1, then it would get the next one, and so forth. But I think we do want to select A1. And now the trick is, we just want this to be a loop. We want this to happen until we run out of data. I wonder what happens when we're out of data. I don't know. I'm going to do this. I'm going to go to the end and find the data. So I went like to column C, get control down arrow, which is going to be the end of the sheet, went back to A and came up until we hit it. So I'm just going to wonder what happens if we run this. Let me run it from here. But without selecting. Well, let me think. I'll just do it. I'll just do the keystrokes. Control down arrow. Control down arrow twice. Takes me to here. Control down arrow twice. Ooh, it takes me all the way down here. So how can I look at that condition and know we're done?
You do is empty active cell and dot end.
Yeah, actually, once I've moved, once I've done, I'm lost. Once I've done this space, I could just check to see if the active cell is empty. Okay, so let's make it. So what kind of loop? For loop or a do loop?
Do.
Yeah, the for loop says I know how many times I'm going before we start. I don't know how many times that is. Especially if there's a different number of spaces in there. Even if I figured out what row I end on, I wouldn't know how many times I'm doing it. So I think you're right. This is a do loop. Do. Maybe even before I put the loop on, but do events. And I'm so nervous, I'm going to say it. Loop. Now I can put the exit clause, the until, either at the top of the loop after do, or I can put it at the end of the loop after loop. Either it works in either place. And the only difference is, if it's at the bottom of the loop, you're guaranteed to run the loop once. If it's at the top of the loop, the condition might be met before you start. And I think I like it better at the top. Even though I'm pretty sure there's going to be data there. If there's not, I don't think I want to do this. So let's put it at the top. Do until. And then the suggestion was until the active cell is blank. That after I do this last move down here, my active cell is going to be blank. So do until is empty. Active cell. Yeah. Look. All right. We give it a go. I think I'm gonna step. I'm not so comfortable to let this thing run. I'm gonna save. I'm gonna save. All right. In fact, here's what I'm gonna do. Now, I don't know if you have you guys learned about breakpoints in class?
That's not familiar.
Yeah, that doesn't sound right.
Let me do this. I'm gonna teach you this thing right here, and this can be really helpful for debugging. I'm gonna put the keyword here, stop. You probably haven't learned stop. Stop is a statement that will take you into break mode. Now, listen, when you push this button to go one line at a time, you're saying I want to run this in break mode, just go one line at a time. But this will take you, whoops, I don't want it, I want that inside the loop. Oh. This will say, oh, however I got here, take me into break mode when I hit stop. So the nice thing is now is that I can run it and it will run all the way up to that line. And then stop. And if I run it again, because that's in the loop, if I run it again, it'll do the next one.
Oh, that's awesome.
And the next one. That way I don't have to keep going through line by line to get there. Make sure you don't leave a stop in your code, like when you submit something, because you know, at the grade, like whatever the TAs are doing to grade it, it's not going to like that for sure. And then it's looking, oh, whoops, I want to hit play. Yeah, it's a little hard to see once you get past the first few. I'm going to zoom out. Not that far. No, come back. There we go. Okay. So now we can get the next couple of ones showing up here. I'll hit play, bringing in the next one, bringing in the next one. I like it. I think I'm ready to comment out my stop and then just hit play to finish it off. It ends up down here at the very bottom. I think I'd like to go back to my data when I'm done. So I'm just going to select A1 again at the very end. And that will take me back up to the top. And there's my labels. Go away. And then I've spun that back into data. One thing I was curious about, if we ever had someone that had like a compound name, and it's kind of tough to tell. That looks pretty good. Hooray. Okay, so that's a kind of an example of batch processing data. How helpful? 0 to 5. 5, 5. Okay. We got the room for another 12 minutes. And those are the examples that I had planned to run through with you. So any other questions? I do have your master file here that I can bring up. So if you've got any question on that, an example from that master file, we can take a look at that. Or we can call it good.
Good. All
right. Well, thanks for coming. I would have liked to have better attendance, but would have been bad if no one came. So I appreciate you guys showing up.
Thank you.
Now my 2 favorite words in all of academia, class dismissed.
Thank you for taking the time to do this review for us.
Yes, thank you.